In this video, we're going to be replacing the front brakes on this 2008 Acura MDX. All right, we're going to take our wheel off and use a 22mm socket. All right, so we're going to remove our caliper from the caliper bracket. We have two 17mm bolts. We'll take those out now. I'm just going to break them free, and we'll switch over to another tool. All right, so now we can try and pull our caliper off. Obviously this one's not going anywhere, so we just use a small pry bar. See if we can get behind the caliper and wedge it backwards. Just do top and bottom, work it out evenly. And at this point is when you want to start to think about what you're going to do with the caliper. We're going to take it, put it on a hanger, and hang it up above without putting any excess strain on our rubber hose. So with one hand on the caliper, we'll take it, back it all the way out. And we'll take our hanger, and we'll just hang it up on the strut coil. All right, so now we can take our pads out. We'll start with the rear pad. Just gonna use a flathead screwdriver. I'm gonna get in between the groove and the pad here and just push out. And we can get in the top. Just wedge that top out. Now take into account we have our wear indicator here, so on our new pads we'll put it in the same position. We'll do the same thing on the front. Sometimes you're able to just grab them and pull them out. Alright, so we have our caliper bracket left. We have two bolts holding in the caliper bracket. We are going to remove them with a 19mm socket on a breaker bar. And you can remove your caliper bracket. So now we have our two Phillips screws holding our rotor in place to the hub. What we do is back these screws out. We did spray them with penetrant, let it sit for a little while. If you do have trouble getting these screws out and you are replacing your rotor, you can try using a hammer and shock freeing these up a little bit. All right, so now with our two screws removed, we can take our rotor right off. Sometimes you'll have to help it a little bit, free it up, and then just take it right off. Just gonna clean that surface, and we'll come back with a wire brush and just make sure there's no residue or debris on here. We want this mating surface as clean as possible. So now what we're going to do before we put the rotor on is just put a little anti-seize on our hub face. And we can put our rotor on. You want to line up your screw locations on your new rotor. Slide that into place and we'll install our two screws. If you have countersunk screws, they'll go here. If not, they'll go here. Push our rotor into place. We can put our Phillips screws in. All right, so now we're going to clean up our caliper bracket. First thing we're going to do is just take off our hardware. I'm going to use a flathead screwdriver and just pop the metal hardware off. We do have new hardware, so no need to be gentle with them. And we can discard those. All we're going to do now is pull our pins. All right, so you want to take note. If you look at these where your bolts go, this is fully round, this one has a notch in it. I'm going to take note of which side or location, top and bottom, that notch goes. First thing you want to do here is just pull back that rubber boot best you can. If you can, grab a hold and pull out your pin. And we'll set that aside. We'll do the same on the bottom. Pull back our boot. This one's a little bit more stubborn. See if we can get in there behind with the pair of pliers. We don't want to use pliers on anything back here. So we're just going to use pliers on the top and just rotate and pull out. And you can see as it's coming out the difference between this and this. This one came out a lot easier, this one didn't. You can see all the grease is gone. So what we're going to do is clean these up, see if we can find that rubber piece that's probably still in there, and put grease on the both of them. So what we're doing here is just locating that rubber piece for the bottom of the pin. Just removing that. You can see some of the grease that's coming out is just very dry, very chunky, which is why the pin wasn't moving freely. So we'll go ahead and clean these out and put some new grease on them. There's a few different ways. If you can get in here with a nice soft bristle brush, no wire brush, no metal, and then just clean those out. What we're going to do is just soak them in brake clean multiple times. And also compress and squeeze the grease. You can just take these right off as long as you're able to get them back in. And just clean inside the boot. I'm just trying to remove all the old grease best we can. What we're also going to do is either with a long pick or a long pocket screwdriver, we're going to remove all the old worn out grease that we can see. I'm actually going to switch to a long screwdriver now. All right, and all this old grease is doing two things. It's stopping that pin from moving smoothly, and because it's all old and stuck down to the bottom there, it's allowing that pin to rust and corrode. So by removing this and putting on new grease and cleaning the pins, should help prolong the life of your caliper. I'm just going to pull that boot out. I'm going to hose that boot down. This is that pin that was very greased up and slid very easily. So we're just going to hopefully remove some pretty good grease out of here. All right, so now we're going to clean up where our bracket hardware goes. We're going to start with a wire brush, and then if we need to, which we probably will, move over to a air tool with just a Scotch pad on it or equivalent. All right, so the main goal here is just to remove corrosion and get yourself a nice flat surface, not to remove metal. So we're not using a sanding disc, we're not trying to take off any metal. All right, so now we can start to reassemble our caliper bracket. What we're going to do is just hold it in the orientation it will go in the vehicle so we know our top and our bottom. And that, and just lay it down so we know our top is here. What we're going to do is put a little brake grease. Again, we took out some of the corrosion here. We're going to protect that with some brake grease. Not a lot, just a light coat. That is too much, but we'll take that and spread it across both sides. All right, now we can install our brake hardware in the correct orientation. What we're going to do now is reinstall our pin boots carefully. We're not looking to poke holes. We're just going to help our rubber boot in place. All right, we'll do the same thing on the other side. Just check all the way around, make sure it's nice and flat against the bracket. All right, so now that we have our pins cleaned, what we're going to do is apply just a light coat of grease all the way up to that rib there. Don't want too much grease, but you do want a light coat across the whole pin. And just a little dab at the bottom. Now we can take this pin, install it in. And what we're going to do is make sure that this top rib here goes over this top rib on the pin itself. I'm just going to compress. All right, our pin's all the way up. Just give it a little pull out, push in, make sure it moves freely, and now make sure that this seats above the top. All right, so our other pin, just put a little dab of grease in this spot here, and that's where we can put our old rubber back in there. And again, we'll put a little grease all along that pin. All right, so now we can reinstall. Now you see, very hard to go in. Sometimes that's because of too much grease. All right, we know we didn't put a large coat of grease on there, so it should just be air trying to work past. Once we get there, it should move freely. We'll check that. All right, so now we have our caliper bracket ready. We can put it back in the vehicle. Just want to put it in place. We'll start on our top bolt. Put our bottom in. Now with our 19mm socket, we go ahead and tighten these down, and then we will torque them to spec. Now this one here, because of this aftermarket shock strut assembly, our socket won't fully make contact with that bolt. You may need to get on here with a wrench and or in a very shallow setup if you have this in your way. So we'll need to move to a wrench. All right, so we're going to torque these two caliper bracket bolts down to 101 foot-pounds. All right, so now we can install our pads. We'll start with the inside pad first. On the outside pad, you're just going to locate these tabs in your metal hardware and slide them in. Press them into the rotor. Typically, you'll have to compress your pistons in your caliper before you put it back on. We do have a little bit of piston out here that we will compress back to show you the process. For this, we're going to use an old pad and a compressor tool. Once you've got them as flush or as low as they need to be to get over your new pads, just go Go ahead and release the pressure. Remove your tool, your old pad, and we can take our caliper off the hanger, put it back into place over our new pads and on our pins. And you can see this top pin has to be moved slightly to align with this angle here. So using that notch and a pry bar, a flat screwdriver, we'll just rotate that. And we can thread in our top bolt. All right, so on the bottom we have the same issue. We're going to have to spin our caliper pin here until it's in line at this angle. We're just going to use a pry bar to do that. All right. Now we can insert our bolt. All right, so now we can torque down our caliper bolts. We're going to torque them down to 53 foot-pounds. All right, so we're just going to not torque these, but just tighten them up, and we'll come back and torque them. All right, so now we can torque down our lug nuts. We're going to tighten them down to 94 foot-pounds. Again, we're going to use a 22mm socket for that. We're going to do them in a crisscross pattern.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.